All right, welcome back to another great episode of Dr. J Radio Live. Of course, I'm your host, Dr. J, broadcasting from the City of Angels. And of course, I'm your host, Dr. J, with the one and only Whitley Streiber, who really doesn't need an introduction to this field. He is one of the biggest names in ufology. He is an alien abductee, a contactee. That's more a better term to use. And I always used to say this, and this still stands true today. If you want to know the truth about what ETs are doing, what they look like, what they smell like, what they feel like, what they're doing to each other, what they're doing to us humans, the only people you could speak to are the people that are having contacts with them. People such as Whitley Streiber. Let me tell you a little story real quick that has to do with our guest as I bring him in. Back in 1997, I was working at a movie theater, private movie theater in Westlake. And one day I was there at work, and a friend of mine who also worked with me said he was a big fan of the movie Deer Hunter. And he said, "Have you seen that movie with uh, the new movie with the person who starred in? What is his name? God darn it. Um, Hold on a second here. I'll tell you what it is, your friends. Anyhow, the point is he was with Christopher Walken. He said, "Have you seen that new movie with Christopher Walken?" It wasn't new to me. I'd already seen it. It's about 7, 8 years before, '89, I believe it came out. And I said, "I know you're talking about." I said, "Communion." The very next day, I brought to him the VHS copy of the movie. I've already read the book. I've seen the movie, and I was blown away to have known he had seen it. Not only he had seen it, he knew it was true himself because he himself too was having encounters, and that really blew my mind. And now I'm introducing our guest, as I already said, Whitley Streiber. Mr. Streiber, welcome back.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm very glad to be back. We're going to have an interesting time tonight.
We always do, and you're always an amazing guest. You've been doing this for a long time, and
I have. I've been doing it for a fairly long time. It's true.
And last year when we had our first conversation on air, I've been waiting to do that for probably 30, 40 years, I think, since the time of investigating this, since 1984. But since I've been doing radio since 2012, so that really connected us. And that story that you were telling that then, what was happening in the airport, what happened with Anne, things that were going on at 3 a.m. in the morning, all
Yeah.
those things really connect with me on a personal level. And also, I've gotten so much confirmation about the 3 a.m. with a lot of people. Things really do happen. Now,
They do.
let's dive into your new book, A New World. Now, you say your contact experiences have picked up in 2015. What has changed?
Well, I'll go back a little ways. I had the communion experience in December of 1985. It was a physical experience, not unlike many of the experiences I have and have had. So it was intense enough to leave me very rattled, and I eventually went to the doctor and went through a whole process of discovery, both inward and outward, and ended up having to face the fact that it had happened and it was not an explainable thing in the terms of the world as I understood it then. And that set me on a quest that I have been on ever since. I started this with the visitors, the contact experience. That was not the beginning of it. The beginning of it was going out in the woods in the dark of the night, which was not easy because what I had seen and experienced was bizarre and absolutely terrifying. And the sense of being, when I was with them, of being completely out of control of the situation, like an animal trapped in a cage, except the difference was I was not in a cage. I had absolutely no way to defend myself. I was physically naked and unable to control anything in any way. And going back to face that. And they weren't nice. They were hard on me. That was hard. But I thought to myself, they're real. This really happened. As incredible and bizarre and impossible as it seemed to the Whitley Streiber of those days, I had to face that fact. And when I started going out into those woods to indicate to them that I was ready to try to make a relationship, to learn more, they responded eventually. After a few weeks, I started to get a response, and that went on then for years, at least to about 1994 or so, during which time I wrote 2 more follow-on books to Communion, chronicling more experiences, transformation, and then breakthrough. And then during that period, I also remembered a lot about my childhood and wrote a book called The Secret School about that. And then the sort of final book in that whole thing was called Confirmation, which wasn't so much about my own experiences as about explorations and research into the phenomenon in general. Then it kind of stopped. I didn't have much going on between about 1996 or 7 and 2007, when there was a very extraordinary and powerful experience that I go into in the new book that set the stage for what would happen later. Then in 2015, in August of 2015, Annie passed away. And there was an extraordinary series of contacts with her that I wrote The Afterlife Revolution about, which is what we talked about when I was last on your show.
That's right.
And at the same time, the visitors returned and became very much part of my life. And that is the genesis of this new book. It's essentially more interpretive than the old books, because I understand this a lot more than I did then. And it is about the experiences that have happened with the visitors since 2015, and inevitably also with Anne and with the dead, this is all mixed in together. It is not, if they are from another planet, the visitors, and they may be, they also don't have a barrier between the living and, as Annie used to put it, what we call the dead, because that's all mixed in together. And when you come into close encounter with them, you also almost inevitably will come into a completely different relationship with your own dead friends and relatives. Your whole soul will be opened up, not just a close encounter of the third kind in the conventional sense, but a complete revision of your experience of the real world is what happens.
Now, when you went through this experience, and you're talking about basically the dead and what Annie was describing them, is there not a difference between the ETs and being passing in another dimension?
Yeah, there probably is, but figuring out what that is another question entirely. The situation I'm in now is this: I have frequent contact, and some of it is physical, and some of it isn't, with both what I would describe as people and what I would describe as something that appears to be aliens. And and other entities as well. The thing is that once you kind of break out of the shell of our little corner of reality, a lot opens up. A whole big door opens up, and it quite frankly becomes quite chaotic. You can't, you're trying to make sense of this. This is aliens from another planet. This is something from another dimension.
That's right.
This is my dead sister, or et cetera, and so forth. It does not work that way. We just don't know what this is. All we know for certain is that it is, and it is highly active, very intelligent. It has a lot to do with us. It has a lot to do with beings that probably are from other planets, and also with an entirely different, unguessed reality that is right here and all around us. And I go into in the book, and it turns out that not only is that reality possible, but there is a very active effort going on in science right now to determine, to prove that it's there. The so-called mirror universe, which I lived in. I saw for 3 days at one point. I wish I could say I walked those stones, but I didn't. But I certainly saw it.
Roger Lear, may he rest in peace. I worked with him a lot. I made 2 documentaries following his surgeries that he removed implants. You had implant, and some people who had implants had them removed and still were being taken. What about yourself?
Yeah, I had an implant placed in my ear, my left ear, in 1989, in May of 1989. I was awake when it happened. I just couldn't stop them, and it wasn't done by aliens as I understand them. It was done by 2 people, a man with a big red beard and a woman. And they arrived at our country house at about 11 at night. They announced their presence by the crunching of gravel in the driveway. And there was no sound of an engine, and there was no sign of any lights, which of course scared the hell out of me. And I went for the bank of floodlights that you could turn on right beside the bed. And as I was turning over to do that, I saw this man and woman at the foot of the bed. I started to go for the shotgun under the bed instead. Because by that time, by 1989, I wasn't concerned about the visitors anymore. They had been in that house many times. When friends were there, and in a new world, those friends are all named. It's not a one guy making claims anymore at all. The children saw them quite frequently, and they weren't dangerous to us. They were a fascinating part of our lives at that point. So I wasn't concerned about them. I was concerned about people because a lot of the local people were also seeing them when they worked at the house, or their friends did, and the rumors were flying that there were demons. I was in league with demons.
Wow.
Because people are so ignorant, most of them, and so vicious, and so scared, and full of crazy lunatic beliefs. And I was afraid we were going to get killed. We were afraid even to walk in our woods. I had to stop by that time walking in the woods at night because I had talked about it on the air, and there were people out there with guns looking for me. So my fear in 1989 was that it was people coming after me, and that's what I saw. The next thing I knew, they moved toward the bed very rapidly, and I became unable to move.
Paralyzed, right?
I was lying on. I didn't feel paralyzed. I just couldn't move. In other words, I didn't feel any sense of anything. I just was everything was black in front of my eyes, and I was motionless, and turned to my right, and someone was pressing down on the left side of my head. That's what I remember. And the woman's voice was speaking very gently and sweetly. She sounded very gentle. And then it ended. There was a flash. There was a crashing sound. in the woods, and I jumped up, grabbed my pistol, and ran off into the house to try to see what was going on. Because as I jumped up, I saw the alarm system was still armed. It had not been breached. But I thought there must be something. They got in somehow. And I ran through the whole house. I checked the attic. I checked the basement. I checked every window and door in the house, not in the garage, but in the house. And absolutely nothing was amiss. So I ended up going back upstairs. I ended up going back upstairs and just sitting on the bedside for a while thinking, was it a lucid dream or what the hell happened? And I went back to bed and, sort of I don't remember sleeping particularly well that night. I got up in the morning and told Annie about it because we had a pact to tell everything as soon as it happens, as soon as we can. And because not careful, the memories get all screwed up when you have high strangeness events, especially when they're traumatic, as any memory expert will tell you. In any case, then I opened the door into the garage to go out to get the paper. And the main garage door was wide open. And yet the alarm system was still armed. I was stunned because there was no way that could be true. The alarm system had been breached big time by the garage door being open, yet there it sat.
Wow, that blows
armed.
me away.
So I called the alarm man. He comes rushing over, came over actually a couple hours later. He didn't come rushing over, but he came over quite quickly. And he checked it, and he said, Whitley, there's a huge magnetic field. It's off the scale on my Gauss meter. You can see it here. And there it was, totally off the scale. But there was no source. In other words, you can't have a free-floating magnetic field. There has to be a magnet there. In fact, for a magnetic field that large, it would have to be an electromagnet. But in that small an area, but there was no anything, nothing, just the two switches. So he just took the switches out and replaced them, and the thing worked fine after that. But we had absolutely no explanation for any of this. It was completely out of bounds technologically. The next thing, though, either that afternoon or the next afternoon, I noticed pain in my left ear. And I reached up and touched it, as I am doing now, and there was a little lump there that hadn't been there before. And I knew all about implants. I was already working with Dr. Lear, and I had my own program to try to detect implants a year before that, in 1988. So there was no question about in my mind. They had entered my house and put an implant in my ear. And I was beside myself. I never felt so claustrophobic in my life. It was horrifying. And I wanted it out. And Annie said, don't do that, Whitley. Let's see how it works first. Let's see what it is and see if you can get something out of it. You didn't sign on to this to run from it. I mean, you've been going out in the woods. You've written books. We're doing this. I said, well, yeah, but you're doing it without an implant in your ear. She said, well, that's true. And so I left it in for a couple of years. Actually, I had planned to have it taken out in a matter of months, but we went out and saw one of Roger's implant removals, which I took her in order to allay her nerves, because he was a podiatrist and this was in my ear, and he had a highly skilled group of surgeons. I don't know if you were in any of his surgeries.
I was, yeah.
Well,
17.
then I mean, they were top drawer in terms of the quality of the work done. And she said, I absolutely am against this. You need to you don't know a thing about it. You need to figure out if it has anything, is it communicating with you? What is it there for? It can't be there to watch you go down to the 7-Eleven and buy the paper. It's got to have another reason. And she was right. I mean, I wanted to know. I wanted to know more. So I struggled with it. It would turn on and turn bright red my ear would turn bright red from time to time, which it just did incidentally yesterday afternoon, amazingly enough. It doesn't do it but once or twice a year. Maybe it knew your show was coming up. I don't know.
Wow.
I was at a concert and it was it was on for about 10 minutes. You can feel it when it's on. Ear gets very hot, and I'll tell you in a few minutes why that's so weird. It's unusually weird now. In any case, in 1997. We were now living in San Antonio, Texas. We had lost the cabin because of people not wanting to buy my books anymore, because I became a laughing stock. I was raped, and I talked about it very gingerly by calling it a rectal probe rather than a rape. And that meant that a lot of these bullies and whatnot were able to make it a joke on TV. And I became sort of a national joke for having been raped. But if you are a joke, if you're controversial, people will buy your books, no question. But if you're being laughed at, no way. And my sales collapsed, and of not just my books about this subject, but of everything. And we lost everything. So anyway, we were down there living in a little condo in San Antonio, and fortunately, I have a lot of friends there, and including friends whose uncle was instrumental in creating something called the Southwest Research Institute, which he developed and underwrote. He was very wealthy, and they introduced me to Dr. William Mallow, who was the head of materials science there. And we began studying Roger Lear's implants, and Roger would come from time to time to the foundation, and we would study. We studied quite a few of his implants, in fact, there. And the question became, why not yours, Whitley? Especially because Bill Mallow saw it turn on in his office one time, raced me into a signals acquisition laboratory, got a signal off of it. Unfortunately, the lab was classified, and I couldn't learn anything about the signal. 20 years later, I was at a library event in San Antonio, and two men walked up to me out of the crowd and said, "We just want to tell you that we were present when that signal was acquired from the implant in your ear, and it remains the most unusual, not one of, but the most unusual signal that has ever been acquired, and it's still under study." And I said, "Well, can I learn more about it?" And he said, "No, in fact, I'm not even supposed to be doing this, but you deserve to know at least this. It's still classified." And he turned and walked out. It was two guys, actually.
You mentioned, I always thought it was to follow where you were, to basically locate you, but it has other functions.
Why would they care?
Right. It would. I think maybe
I've learned a lot about this thing, and that's not of any interest to anyone except me. I mean, the fact that I'm at the grocery store or wherever, if they want to come, they're going to come to you in the night anyway, and you're always going to be in bed. They're not going to care whether you're in. And the other thing is, they have never had any trouble finding me at all. And maybe it is the implant. I don't know. But what I found out it does is absolutely amazing. And I found all this out after Anne died. It didn't work. It really didn't work before she died. But after she passed away, I happened to be sitting in front of a bright white wall, and I noticed something very strange, not in my left eye, but in my right eye. There was a sort of slit. It was a neat oblong slit in the center of the field of vision, quite faint, not something you would notice normally. and so I noticed it because there was movement there, and I closed my left eye and peered at it, and the movement was letters racing back past at breakneck speed. In fact, they were words. I was writing at the time that I did this, and I thought, my God, this isn't a hallucination or some kind of natural thing. This is technology. I asked my eye doctor for an exam, and I'm not going to tell him what I'm seeing because I've learned that you don't tell doctors things like that. But I thought if he sees something, he's certainly going to say it. And he said he gave me the exam, and he didn't comment on any slits or anything like that. So I assumed that he didn't see it. And in fact, I've had plenty of eye work done since then, and it has never been seen by anybody. But I can certainly see it, but not like now. If I went into a room with a bright white wall and looked now, it wouldn't be there. It comes after I start writing for a day or two, and I have learned a lot about it. It is I've learned to catch some of the words, and what it's doing is passing words that are indirectly related to what I'm working on and thinking about. And it therefore gives me, it's like a muse. It gives me ideas. And it gives, and it enhances my ability to think tremendously. It's quite extraordinary in that respect. It's so valuable. I wrote a book called In Hitler's House, which I published under a pseudonym, the pseudonym of Jonathan White Lane, under a pseudonym because people would not be able to understand why Whitley Streiber would suddenly write a historical novel. Because in fact, I love to write historical novels. So it's a novel about Hitler, and it's very historically accurate. And I used the implant all through the writing of it to get all kinds of little details about Hitler's life, and they were always on the money, always. Then came the writing of A New World, and this thing became unbelievably useful. I got ideas from it. I got definition. If I would read passages that I'd written in my book, I would get all kinds of memories that I just seemed buried would suddenly show up, or ideas that I hadn't thought of in years. I even asked it once. I need to know. I bet there is something that I don't know anything whatsoever about that would be important to this book, of key importance. I want to know what that is. And it led me to the idea of the fine structure constant, which I knew nothing about, never even heard of. And when I looked it up, I found out that it was the most mysterious, it was the greatest mystery of physics. And it had been discovered by a great physicist named Wolfgang Pauli, who made it his life's work to understand it. And the mystery of it is so important to my book. And you read the book, you'll see why. But the mystery of it is that we don't know why it is what it is. It's 1/137th. And it is the distance between spectrographic lines in a spectrogram of the hydrogen atom, essentially, is what it is. And all of the other constants in nature, the Planck constant, which is the closest possible distance two things can be together, all of the other constants have an explanation in physics. In other words, we can understand why they are what they are. This one is totally arbitrary. It's, as Pauli used to say, it's as if God simply decided it was a fun number and made it that way. And it drove him nuts because he's a physicist. He's not interested in fun numbers. He's interested in how things work. He caused him to become a friend of the psychiatrist Carl Jung, and they together discovered what is known as synchronicity, which I'm sure your listeners know about.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
And this implant works. One of the main ways it works is by inducing synchronicity. It is the most sophisticated research tool I know of in the possession of anyone. And I am so grateful for two things. One, that it was put in me in the first place, enabling me in this time when I understand more to write A New World and Afterlife Revolution, because it helped me on that too. The book that I wrote with Anne after she passed away. It helped me with those things. I'm so grateful that it was put in, and I am so grateful to Anne for insisting that I not get it taken out. She let me, I finally, to go back a little bit, in 1997, the attempt was made to remove it by Dr. John Lerma, and when he touched it, opened up the ear, there was no scar there because it had been put in right through the skin. He said it's a white disc, and when he touched it, it moved down into the earlobe. It was up in the top of my ear, and he pulled out because he said, nothing I can do with this. I have to take your ear off. And the next day, it moved back up to where it is to this day. So there you have it, the implant, my most valuable possession.
Let me give a shout out real quick to a super chatter. Justin T, thank you so much for your support, and of course to the Blue Crew. Now, let me ask you this, Whitley. What kind of implant? Did you ever have it removed?
No, I didn't have it removed.
So it's still there. You can't remove it because of the ear.
I use it every day.
And this is what helped you because of the synchronicity writing the new book as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It helped me tremendously. It helps me with all my writing. It's not on now. I was on yesterday afternoon, but it's for some reason, I don't know why. It's not on right now, but it is on generally when I'm writing, yes.
Now, this is something I'm going to veer off the questions for a minute real quick. Let me ask you this, and just to go back. When I was working with Dr. Roger Lear, and I originally thought when I came to him that it was beyond locating us, that it was possibly sensing our five senses, smell, touch, hearing, and even, like you mentioned, putting thoughts in your head. Those thoughts and ideas, were they coming in through your own voice?
No, they come in as words in the little slit in my right eye. They go fast too quickly to be. You're not conscious of them, but they're drawn into your. They go into sort of immediately the level below consciousness, where your thoughts come together. In other words, they enhance your thought processes would be the best way to put it, and in ways that are just wonderful. I mean, they're very useful. It's very useful in that respect. And the other thing it does is it creates synchronicities. In other words, if you ask it a direct question, an answer will come back in a funny, usually unexpected way. An example of this is in the book, the Hitler book that I was writing when I was learning to use this. The book sort of turned out to be practice. I asked it about Hitler's toothpaste because the book requires a lot of verisimilitude. It's a historical novel. You have to feel like the author of it was really there. So you have to get every kind of detail. I'm sure if you're interested in historical novels that you know a lot of the best ones are like that. They really give you the feeling of being there.
That's right.
And So, uh, that's a hard thing to find. I couldn't find it, and I could have picked arbitrarily picked some tooth. The reason this is important, by the way, in his personal life, he brushed his teeth 4 times a day. He was very obsessive about this. So it would come
Huh.
into any story about his intimate life. That's why I'm talking about it.
Uh,
Eh,
I
Go
didn't know
ahead.
that. That's OCD, literally.
Well, I know it's totally OCD. The implant, you want OCD. The implant is OCD big time because it's really working. In any case, uh, what happened was the next, I think it was the day after I asked this question, I was looking on Google for other things, and suddenly it became Google German. And I thought to myself, what in the world has happened to my Google? I
Huh.
don't I don't even speak German. And so I got the thing that translates web pages on Google and translated the page, and it was a page about a book written by one of Hitler's valets, which is in German.
Wow.
And so I ordered the book from the German Amazon. It came a couple of weeks later. By chance, seeming chance, the next night, I was in the company of somebody who speaks fluent German, and I asked her, would you be willing to translate this for me? And she said, of course. And I gave her the book, and I had not only Hitler's toothpaste, but all of the details about his private life from one of his valets. That's how it works.
Multiple synchronicities just on that,
Oh,
literally.
God. And can you imagine if these things were in the possession of scientists and intellectuals and people more than me, with more powerful intellects than mine? I can't be the only person like this. This is a gift, and it has to belong to everyone, especially the people who can make the most use of it. I mean, that's why my book is the way it's an attempt to make contact happen because there is so much there for us. And I know all the horror stories, all the terror stories, all the stories that say don't do this, stay away, it's dangerous, coming from people who believe in demons, coming from people in the government, coming from every which direction there is, but not so much from the contact witnesses. Because if you read the studies of us, you find that most of us had a really rough time at first,
That's right.
but we ended up in a very rich and fruitful experience of contact, which is certainly my life. And now this book, A New World, is about not. It's not a how-to book, although there's certainly you can pull how-to out of it for sure. But it's there to show how one person's experience since the year 1985 has been, and what has been useful about it, and what has been hard, and what I have done to bring it into focus and to interest them enough to keep coming back to me and to be in my life. All of that. Because, we need help now. This planet is in trouble. And anyone who says differently is simply fooling themselves. You can see it every day in the weather forecast and every other way. It's like right now, we're having a hell of a cold spell across the whole United States, and it feels like really winter is here. But you go into the high Arctic, and it's totally incredibly warm there, bizarrely warm. It's like the Arctic summer still, and that is not right. That is not right.
I know Europe, in fact, is being flooded in certain areas. Venice, Athens, for instance.
Well,
And
Venice is horribly flooded, and it looks like they're going to be flooded again shortly.
now you say that these are that they are already helping the scientists. How so?
Well, I give you a couple of examples in the book, and people are named in this book. I've got their permission, of course, but people are named. It's not. People are not. It's not. I just want to be sure people understand this. This is not something that's hidden anymore. Two scientists, Dr. Cary Mullis, who wrote his own book, including his experiences. He's the Nobel Prize-winning chemist. He passed away, unfortunately, last year, so I couldn't interview him directly for this book, but we did know each other, and we did speak together. And he couldn't pinpoint. He had a really cool close encounter experience at his summer home in Northern California. He was walking out one evening, and he saw what looked to him like a raccoon with glowing green eyes look up at him and say, "Good evening, Dr. Mullis." And he didn't remember anything else, and he was sort of had this missing time experience. But I talked to him about it, and he could not pinpoint anything that he could say definitely had helped him in his work. But he felt like it was a very mind-opening thing. And he wouldn't say it helped me with this and this and this specifically, but he also said that he felt like it had been a supportive experience. Let me put it that way. Now, the other one, Dr. Ed Bell-Bruno, is the Humboldt Prize winner for 2018. The Humboldt Prize is Germany's most distinguished prize for a scientist from abroad. And Ed is a tremendously successful and brilliant mathematician who has revolutionized orbital dynamics. And that has changed the way we get satellites into orbit, the way we get things to the moon, the way we get things to Mars. Has changed everything. It's one of the most valuable mathematical bodies of mathematical work in the world now. And Ed had a close encounter on a lonely road in Wyoming, I believe. And when he came away from that, his ideas and the calculations had changed. And when he translated these ideas into new formulas, he realized he had rebuilt orbital dynamics. In other words, what's happened here is not he sat down across a table from them and they explained it all. What's happened here is his mind was open enough to absorb the material. And this can happen more. We are closed. The door to the human mind is closed right now. The book is all about opening that door to what is there and here and willing to help us. And it is willing to help us. They do want us to survive. How do I know that? Well, this has been with us throughout our history. It's always been with us. I don't think there's been a time in human history and before that this strange phenomenon has not been present, but present at a very low level of involvement. And so the result is we've had incidents in the past where human beings have been affected by it, sometimes very profoundly, as in the moments where there were these there have been plenty of strange incidents. Ancient Aliens has got some substance to it, probably, although I'm not sure that we've ever pinned down exactly what that is. We have been affected almost certainly by this in the past. But we have all kinds of legends of gods and sylphs and demons and ghosts and angels and fairy folk. That's all this experience. Now what happens in the 40s is this terrible war breaks out. And
World
at the
War
end,
II you're talking about,
World War
right?
II, which climaxes with the atomic bomb. And who's ever on the other side of the curtain realizes at that point, this is serious. They're going to kill themselves. And all of a sudden, everything changes, and they begin to appear in greater and greater numbers and in more and more obvious situations. The first modern UFO events occur. Then the first flyovers occur that are become part of the public record. The Roswell incident takes place. And for anyone who doesn't believe in that and has believed any of the guff that's been said about it, my own uncle was involved in it, and his best friend, General Arthur Exon, and it happened. Let me put it that way. It happened. So that happens. We end up in possession of all kinds of extraordinary materials and even biological materials, which we can study and are still studying to this day. Then there's another crash, what's known as the donation site in New Mexico, which is discussed in Diana Walsh Pasoka's book, American Cosmic. And we get more materials from the donation site. We end up in a situation where we have a wealth of these extraordinary materials. We've got some biological materials that are much deteriorated and much more harder to understand, but we've got this stuff. So we begin working from our side, and we use these materials to learn more, and all kinds of different areas of human endeavor are enhanced by these discoveries. But at the same time, the visitors are enforcing secrecy, because we have to close the gap between them and us enough to where we will not approach them as supplicants, but as equals, because they don't want supplicants. They want us to be equal to them, or to think of ourselves as being self-empowered. There's an article written by T.B.H. Kuiper and Mark Morris in the April 1977 issue of Science, the magazine Science, which says that anyone approaching us from the stars would be completely that would have all knowledge, and therefore there would be the only thing interesting here would essentially be our creativity and our innovation. And if they were to show themselves the way they are now, or the way they were then and the way we were, we would immediately lose all interest in our own development and try to be caging information from them. So they have held this secret. They are the source of the secrecy. There's no point in being angry at the government. It's doing what it has to do. But that's changing. My book lays out a groundwork for how to communicate with them by explaining how I and others in the close encounter experience do it, basically. And if and when they emerge more, that book will be useful to people. Prior to that, I think it'll probably be read by us, by the close encounter witnesses and other people interested in the UFO phenomenon.
I heard Bob Lazar recently say that we have to catch up on our material sciences before we get to them, until they appear. This is apparently what you're saying, true?
Excuse me. Yes, we do. We have to catch up because, they don't have anything. We don't have anything to offer them except our minds. And if our minds are fixated on what they have and not what we have to offer, we're useless to them. We're a waste. We're what waste.
We also won't grow spiritually.
We won't grow in any way. Well, look what happens when Western technological civilization spread around the world. It disempowered one local civilization local culture after another. And they are all out there just now, in some cases, beginning to regain their own cultural identity. The Native Americans in North America were hammered by Western culture, because not only was it a superior culture in all kinds of ways that really counted, like the ability to hunt and things like that, counted to the Indians, but it was also violently aggressive toward them, and they were beaten almost to death. I mean, many tribes went extinct. So now some tribes are beginning to recover their own cultural identity and finding that their cultural identity is meaningful, and their religious beliefs are richly productive in terms of spiritual growth, and that they have a value of their own. The donation site, and for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, that's a site in New Mexico that Diana Walsh-Pasulka talks about a lot. It's secret, the site, and I don't ever talk about secrets. I'm not like, she spilled the beans, but I don't spill the beans. I'm a team player in that regard. I don't have a security clearance, but when I'm told something is secret, I take that very seriously. I do have honor, and if someone asks me to keep something under my hat, I'm going to do it. I'm not a rebel, not by nature. So anyway, she spilled the beans, and now I can talk about it.
Is that the Aztec site?
No. No, it's not. It is. It's in New Mexico. That's not the important part about it. We've been harvesting material from there for 70 years, and have gotten a lot of stuff. But here's the important thing about this site, and I go into this deeply in A New World, because you've got to understand. It's important to understand these things. Like everything the visitors do, there's more than one level to it. Things are multi-layered. The donation site left a lot of material that we have obtained, and it still is harvested from there from time to time. The strange thing about it is that certain people can find stuff there and other people can't, which is in and of itself an interesting quality of the site.
The chosen ones, it sounds like, literally.
Well, literally. I mean, people who have we don't know. I mean, there's lots of brain work on different brain areas, trying to figure out why certain people are different, why certain people are psychic, for example. And you can take a dowser to a place like this, and you'll find all kinds of things. And you take someone else and give them a rod, and they walk through it, and then, that's it.
Yeah.
You don't know why. But in any case, near the donation site, in the same general area, is the site where a Catholic nun, a Carmelite nun from Spain, appeared to the local Indian tribe before the Spanish conquistadors arrived and Christianized them. With the result that when the monks arrived and the Inquisition arrived, they were already Christian, and they were not killed or burned at the stake or whatever else those people did to them. And you see what was happening then in the world, and this is the message of the donation site, that the Spaniards had superior technology, but not superior spiritual growth and ethics. In fact, their spiritual growth and ethics were arguably inferior to those of the Indians in that area. So the result is that the Indians were shocked by the by the power of the Spaniards, but unlike so many others across the whole western United States, and when the Europeans swept into the Americas over the whole of the Americas, from Tierra del Fuego all the way to the North Pole, their culture was preserved because they had already accepted and come to understand what the missionaries were talking about, and the missionaries were not so hard on them. It's a warning. Do you see the warning there? Yes, we have superior technology, but no, don't assume that means you're looking at something that is also ethically and spiritually more advanced than you are. Because those things, ethics and spiritual power, spiritual advancement, are so deeply individual to a specific species that one species that we just or to a culture rather that there's absolutely no reason to believe that someone who is technologically more advanced is also ethically higher, because the Spaniards certainly were not. And look at the most advanced scientific and technological culture on planet Earth in 1939. It was Nazi Germany.
That's right.
One of the totally crazy, insane, not even close to being ethically competent. It was a moral black hole of Calcutta.
27 million Soviets were killed on top of the 6 million Jews just by the Nazi regime.
Yeah, absolutely. And they were able to do that because they were so technologically superior. And the only reason they lost World War II was simply because Hitler was overly ambitious and there were not enough Germans.
I heard part of exactly because he went to North Africa. If he didn't go spend his resources there, he could have conquered more of Europe.
Well, actually, if you, I know far too much about history. I'm obsessed with history. Sometimes my wife used to accuse me of knowing what chewing gum Nero used. I said they didn't have chewing gum in ancient Rome, honey. But if they had, I would have known. In any case, what happened to Hitler, I'm going to go completely off subject for a second, but it's fascinating. In Russia was extremely simple. He was so convinced that they would take Moscow by the end of October that the entire infrastructure of the Wehrmacht dared not prepare the army for winter. Therefore, there was no antifreeze available at the front. The train tracks froze. They could not bring up any more supplies. There was not only no winter clothing, but more importantly, no antifreeze, so the vehicles could not move. They were literally frozen in place. As a result, because of the fundamentally flawed nature of dictatorship, where one man has to make all of the critical decisions, and one man is obviously incapable of doing this, he lost, and thank God he did lose, the Battle of Moscow, and therefore also World War II.
One thing about that, too, like you mentioned, I've seen pictures of the people frozen to death, and you're absolutely right. I love how, and you talked about your history, the fact that you are a history buff. If we don't know our history, we're doomed to repeat it.
Yeah, well, that's right. We are repeating it now, in fact. Let's not get into that.
Yeah.
We're not here to talk about that. We can turn on the TV and see that anytime.
Let me ask.
This is unique stuff. You don't hear this anywhere else in the world.
I definitely agree with that. I wanted to ask you about the mirror universe. In your book, you have evidence about that. Can you tell us more about it?
Yeah. Let me tell you what happened. This was the single most extraordinary experience in my life. And when I say that in this life, that means it was really something, because I've had the privilege of having an awful lot of extraordinary things happen to me. I just thank my lucky stars I was dumb enough and curious enough to start going out in those woods, because if I hadn't done that, this life that I have led would never have unfolded. So this happened last summer, in July, on the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota. It's the Lakota Sioux Reservation, and the poorest, Oglala, Lakota County is the poorest county in the United States, to give you an idea of what it's like on the reservation. It's a beautiful place, rolling hills. The Badlands are just to the west of the reservation. The place is exquisitely beautiful and agonizingly poor. I was invited there on for a little conference. There were only going to be 20 people at the conference, which is unusually small. There are usually a couple thousand people at these conferences. But I thought, how fascinating to be on an Indian reservation, to get to meet Native Americans. I always find them so interesting. And, I come from a different cultural background. Most Americans come from a cultural background where the Indians were the enemy, But I'm a German American, and the Germans who came here were free thinkers, and they were also very spiritual people in Texas. And they had a very high opinion of the Indians because of their religion. They thought very highly of the Indians' religion, and I was always taught that the Indians knew the secret of God. So I have a great respect for these people, coming from my childhood. And what happened then was I went onto the reservation and flew up there and drove from, was driven. Actually, I was being driven by someone in the group who had a big car. And driving onto the reservation, everything was perfectly normal. We went to the All Nations Gathering Center, a little center there that is run by Dallas Chief Eagle, and his wife Becky, who have spearheaded the programs that are there for trying to bring all the tribes together and to re-empower Indian culture, Native American culture, and religion. So we were there, and the first afternoon, I was being driven, I believe, back to the motel I was in. I was tired, and I closed my eyes. And behind my closed eyes, I saw a lot of movement. So I opened my eyes again. It was quite confusing. I mean, this is a person who's got an implant in the first place, and so, movement behind my eyes. I closed them again, and I realized I was seeing another version of the world behind my closed eyes, not just in vague form, but in incredible detail and color, with everything. It was beyond belief. It was no hallucination, because a hallucination will last a little while, but it doesn't turn on and off when you open and you close your eyes, not to my knowledge, and it doesn't last for 3 days, which this lasted. And when I was in the car, when I was sitting not when I was inside the All Nations Center, but when I was standing outside of it on the little trail or path nearby, at any time I was outdoors at that reservation, when I closed my eyes, it was like putting on a virtual reality headset where I could see another version of the world. I could lean down and look at the plants and flowers and the stones in the other world, and then open my eyes, and it would be different stuff, and close them, and they were like superimposed on one another. I could see streams, rivers, trees, the wind blowing, clouds. When I was in the car and riding, if I put my head back and closed my eyes, I saw the sky, not the ceiling of the car. The roads in the other world were much more primitive. They were macadam covered, terrain hugging roads rather than graded highways like that were present in our reality. The result of this was when my eyes were closed and we were going down the road, and the road in the other reality went off down a hill, and we went straight on the graded highway, it felt exactly like the car had taken flight. It was just uncanny. It was absolutely astonishing. It's unbelievable. And one other woman in the car had extensive experience of this too. At least one morning she did. And some of the other people, I just sang out. The car was full of people. Every time we were in it, I would just sing out to people exactly what I was seeing everywhere. I didn't keep it to myself at all. So, because it's gone. I go into it in the book, and I explain what it is, and I explain why it was there, and then I go into the fact that we can find out and are working on this scientifically to find out whether or not a mirror universe exists. They're going to do that by firing neutrons at a thick lead panel, so thick that neutrons cannot pass through it. If some neutrons pass through it, it means that they detoured through the mirror universe, and that's how they got to the other side. We believe this is present because, for example, there are certain cosmic rays that, when they reach Earth's atmosphere, have more energy than they should have had they traveled only through this universe. And we think they must have taken a detour through a parallel universe or through the mirror universe and ended up passing through less space than they otherwise would have. And that's why their energy level is higher than it should be. There are also certain elements in our universe that are not as it isn't as densely populated with a certain type of lithium, for example, than it should be based on our understanding of how the Big Bang worked. And there is also evidence that our gravity should be heavier than it is, or more intense than it is, and it's the lack of intensity in our gravity. It suggests that it was absorbed in part by some of the mass was absorbed by a mirror universe, and the calculations suggest this universe would be about 5 times the size of our universe. And interestingly enough, we have about 5 times more. We know there is about 5 times more dark matter existing than matter, light matter, that we can detect. Is that dark matter the mirror universe? We'll find out, because the science is already there. We can find this out, and we will find it out, and I don't think it's even going to be more than a couple of years before we do. How exciting this all is to me.
It really sounds to me like a multiverse, not just a mirror universe.
No, no, that's different. Actually, that's a possibility too. I go into that in the book as well. The multiverse is a proliferation of physical universes, not a parallel universe that's sharing the same space as ours. Those are different things. And there have been 2 instances in astrophysics where first in 2007, an enormous gap was discovered in our universe that suggests that it once collided with another universe that is so far away its light has not reached us. in the 15 billion years our universe has been around, but that collided with our universe sometime in the very distant past. There's also there's an anomaly in the background microwave radiation in our universe that suggests that it has been close to another physical universe as well. And the physics of proliferating universes is very strong. There's a strong chance that the idea that there is essentially an endless proliferation of universes is true. And I find that just delightful. I love things like that. Give me an unanswerable question and I'm in heaven. I love that stuff.
Now, how can we cross into this universe? Other people, how can I cross into it? Is it possible?
I would love to cross into it. Believe me, when I was on that reservation, I can see it in front of my eyes. I was trying everything I could think of to cross into it. Of course, I was telling people about this, and one guy says to me, well, Whitley, what if you don't come back? And I said, I don't care. I'm here for the adventure. And if it ends up I walk off a cliff, so what? Annie and I decided a long time ago that this could obviously get dangerous, what we were doing. But we were doing it for the adventure. We were going to learn what we could. And she used to say, if you go out in the woods and get eaten, I'm going to be very sad. I'm going to miss you. But I'm certainly going to tell the story as best I can. And I said, well, you go out in the woods. She said, no, I didn't see the visitors. I got to stay at home. So, and it's the same with this. I wanted so badly to cross over into that universe, and I couldn't do it. But, I'll bet you that it's possible. And that not only that, somebody knows very well how to do it. And that's why some of the visitors don't seem completely physical to us. They seem sort of, and I've met some of these many times, there's just something off about their physical presence. It's not as physical as it should be. And I bet that that's because they're from that parallel universe, and they do know how to cross the barrier.
It's very interesting you say that, because a lot of people say that when they see them, they may be transparent because maybe 30% is here, 70% is there.
Yeah, exactly. I've had that experience. I've seen that with my own eyes. I've seen a translucent being come out of the front door of our cabin as my son and I were walking up to the cabin one morning after camping in the woods, when the cabin was full of people and they'd had all kinds of visitor experiences in the cabin during the night. And this hooded figure came out the front door, went before our eyes, went down the deck, turned and went down the deck in front of us, across the backyard and into the woods, and shot off into the woods very quickly, but it did not go through the trees. It dashed around each tree because it was too solid to actually go through things. I've seen the visitors go through things, some of them, but not this time. And I think that somewhere back in there, it probably simply just disappeared when it went fully into the other universe. I think the mirror universe is there, and I do think that's where some of them come from.
Is it populated with humans as well? Or at least human-looking like?
Well, when I saw it, that was my question immediately. I was looking for buildings and some sign of habitation. I saw a couple of buildings, but I didn't see a single person or animal. I would see a sort of a flash of light here and there, and I have a feeling that I saw fences and stuff, and there was the road was there. It was obviously inhabited, but I did not see people. And I think that I couldn't see them for some there was something about the relationship between our minds or something that made it impossible. I think those flashes of light might have been people and animals. There's a lot we obviously don't know. I mean, I don't know of any other story ever like this of such an extended experience of this. So, but there are other things. You remember the National Institute for Discovery Sciences ranch, in Utah, which Bob Bigelow bought, or I think
Skinwalker Ranch, right?
Skinwalker Ranch. Yeah, that's what it's called. Well, when the scientists first, this is in Colm Kelleher's book about it, when the scientists first arrived there, right before they arrived, the ranchers, the family was waiting to just literally turn over the keys to them when a huge wolf walked up out of a marsh and jumped into their goat pen. And they fired guns at the wolf, and the wolf reacted but wasn't killed or anything. It finally jumped out of the goat pen and went back into the marsh and disappeared in the marsh. Then the scientists arrived, and of course the family excitedly told them about this. They went into the marsh, and they found the tracks of this huge wolf, and they made casts of those tracks. They proved to be a 300-pound animal, and they were able to, by analyzing the density of the marsh mud, they were able to calculate its weight very precisely. There is no wolf on Earth now that is 300 pounds in weight. But there was, during the Ice Age, the Pleistocene, a wolf known as the dire wolf that was very present in that area. A lot of them were around that did weigh about 300 pounds. And I think that in the mirror universe, the Pleistocene hasn't ended. The Ice Age hasn't ended, which would explain why it was very cloudy and it looked cold to me compared to where I was. Like it was summer, but not as much so as it was where I was. And I think that I don't think that there could be a time difference even, I don't know, but I don't think so. And I think that it's quite possible if I had gotten into the mirror universe, I would have been immediately devoured by a dire wolf. And I would have thought as I went down the gullet, oh, darn, it serves you right, but this would have been such a great story. Too bad you can't tell it.
Yeah, to say the least, right?
Yeah.
It sounds like a saber-toothed wolf to me, literally.
No, saber-toothed tigers didn't live in that environment. They were in a different type of environment. And the saber-toothed tiger it would hide and charge. I mean, I could have fallen victim to one, no question about that. They were very, very present in that part of the world, but they were generally, their habitat was further south where it was more, there was more foliage, because they hid in the foliage and waited for an animal to come close and then jumped the animal and sank their fangs in. They had a different, an entirely different modus operandi than a wolf.
And I'm assuming a different area too on this planet too, right?
Well, no, you would have found them if you'd gone 200 miles to the south from where I was. You would have found a habitat that they were congenial in. In fact, if you go to the La Brea tar pits in Los Angeles, you'll find plenty of saber-toothed tiger bones and skeletons, because the mammoths would get caught in the tar and they'd bellow and scream, and the tigers would realize that there's food there, and they would go after the mammoths, and they'd get caught in the tar, and so it went for thousands of years.
I was fortunate enough to live across the street from the tar pits when I was going to law school, and I used to visit them all the time, and I would just wonder how many creatures were caught in there. It's amazing you just brought that up. Now, let me bring you back to the visitors themselves. I know in the past I've heard you say that they make mistakes, and other people say they have super high IQs. You also mentioned in your new book that they think differently than us. How so?
Well, now this is more speculative on my part. My book goes from observation. It's not a book about how-to book or a book about what I believe or don't believe. I believe nothing. Belief is not part of my life. I think I follow my wife's ideas, which are that the human species is too young to have beliefs. What we need are good questions. And I'm trying for the good questions. Okay, that's basic here. So, oh, heck, what was the question again? Darn it.
I was asking about how they think differently than us.
Oh, yeah, the two different modes of thought.
Yeah.
Okay, well, a human being is definitely a totally physical entity, and it needs to eat and to avoid predators and all kinds of different things. Therefore, the human body is designed and the brain is designed to see the outside world in a practical, objective way, so that when a human being looks at an apple, he sees an apple. He does not see, however, the basic truth of what's there. He does not see the mathematics and the particles and the forces that make up that apple first. He can see those things. We can use prosthetic devices to see them, such as telescopes, or in the case of looking at the structure of an apple, an electron microscope, or microscope, then an electron microscope. We can definitely see those things, but not with our naked eyes. I think the visitors see things much more from a mathematical viewpoint, because I don't think they necessarily have the same physical needs that we do, and they didn't evolve. Their brains evolved in a completely different way. I can't say that I understand how what that would make the world look like to them, but I do know this, that they don't think the way we do, and they try to communicate to us in imagery. And a perfect example of this, as I point out in the New World, is crop circles. Crop circles in the whole of all of the crop circles that have been found, of the real ones. There are plenty of fakes out there nowadays, unfortunately, but of the real ones, just a few have had images in them. Most of them are mathematical and geometrical forms. Like two of the early great crop circles were the Julia set next to Stonehenge, and the triple Julia that appeared a few days later. They could not have been created by people with boards on their feet. That's a sinful lie, and they were created by an extraordinarily skilled presence that was trying to communicate visually, using the crops as the medium, like a blackboard, its concepts, the mathematical concepts, which were its own way of thinking. And if you look at the whole range of these formations, they're all like that. They're all essentially geometric and mathematical, geometric shapes, and behind them mathematical formula and mathematical concepts written out in the grass as if on a blackboard, and not in equational notation, but in the next level below, which is the geometric shapes that those equations would normally express. So that's why I think that that's the way they think in input, not in output. And the gulf between us is huge for that reason. You're never going to be able to sit down across a table from somebody who thinks that way and successfully converse with them and both know that you actually are talking about what you think you're talking about, because it won't happen. But what you can do is they can proceed by demonstration to communicate very accurately with us. And this is why in my book I also talk about hieroglyphics and how hieroglyphics are a representational language. And we can develop a representational language to share with the visitors over time and learn to communicate in this very ancient and what would also be now a very new way. We can do it.
What I'm thinking of crop circles, one of the famous ones I'm thinking is Arecibo message, that had the message about the DNA, about the structure of the beings, about the way they transmit the imagery, or like unlike the way we use satellites, they use something else. Do you recall that? What I'm talking about?
Yes, of course. Well, that image near the radio telescope and the image of the face nearby are two of the three imagistic crop formations that have appeared in history. There may have been one or two others that I'm forgetting, but those are the main ones. And they are completely unlike the rest of the formations. And I wouldn't be at all surprised if they were completely authentic either. In fact, I'm quite sure they are. That people who call them hoaxes are just talking through their hats, if that's still an expression anybody uses. My kids always accuse me of talking in the slang of yesteryear, which is probably true. But in any case, they're very informational and very useful to us, but they're also very rare, because there was an attempt, and I think it's an attempt that has basically failed, to communicate with us on their terms in the mathematics of meaning rather than in the images of meaning. And we didn't pick up on it because we don't understand the regular geometric crop circles. We don't understand the message. We've never looked at them in terms of sentences, for example. We look at each formation individually and try to figure it out, but they may have relationships to one another. We've never tried superimposing them on each other. We've never been very inventive about it, because most of our best minds and our most skilled scientific minds wouldn't dream of glancing at a crop circle, because the intelligence community has worked so darn hard to make sure that they won't do that we won't try. But we should try. We should rethink the crop formations as an attempt to communicate, and ask ourselves then, what might they mean as communications, assuming that they are communications that are basically formed not out of images, but out of mathematics.
Binaries, what I'm thinking about, one way they transmit data. And as a matter of fact, the Arecibo message was in binary code.
Well, the message, the disk at it's not Milk Hill, the one where the face of the gray alien appears.
I think that's the Arecibo one. The same
no,
one.
No, that's not Arecibo. It's called it was called the Milk not oh heck. Anyway, I'll remember the name of the formation and the name of the town and where the formation, the place where the formation was discovered in a minute. There's a disk there, and and on the disk there's a message in binary code to the effect that to a warning about those who come bearing gifts, and that they come that they are deceivers, and these people who are giving this message, obviously from the outside looking in, are opposed to deception. And you know what was interesting to me? Crabwood, it's the Crabwood Formation, about that message was as soon as I saw it, an absolute chill ran down my spine. Because from the beginning of my experience with the beings I call the visitors, deception has been a huge no-no. They will work with me and work with me to explore any level of deception in anything I write, and will want it pulled out of there. If I so much as connect two dots that I really can't connect, that's out. No way. I have to say only what I know, and I have to say as the limits of my knowledge of it. I cannot pretend to know more than I do. And I cannot leave things out either unless I absolutely have to. So I thought to myself, my God, that's a message directly from the people who are in my life. We oppose deception. I'll never forget that. When I read those words, I thought, this feels like this is in some small way personally for me. And it was very reassuring, too, because people, the dark side of this is that it's very deceptive. But what I've had in my life hates deception.
Let me ask you this. There's a question in the chat that a couple are coming about 3 a.m. if you don't mind me asking, if it's okay with you. Do you mind answering that real quick?
Sure.
It says, when Whitley gets woke up at 3 a.m., is it a physical visitor?
It's I am physically woken up, but maddeningly, I never see anybody. And when I want the engagement, so I don't set an alarm or anything. They'd probably be delighted if I did, but I don't. I want to either wake up myself, or if I don't wake up myself, I'm waked up. And when was I last waked up? Probably, I don't remember exactly because it happens so often, probably a couple nights ago. And usually, no, it's longer. It's a couple weeks. I was in Texas when I was last waked up, and that was 3 weeks ago. So I'm in California now. Anyway, what happens when I'm waked up is the first time it happened, they shocked one of my toes. The second time it happened, they shook my right nipple. In other words, it was very forceful at first. And there were a lot of different ways of doing it. They were very inventive, and I was kissed once or twice. It would blow in my face and blow on the back of my hand. Let's see what else. Oh, call me from the living room, which was exciting because there's nobody in the apartment but me. And suddenly I hear what sounds like a young person, male or female, I couldn't tell, voice call very distinctly from the living room, Whitley. So hey, they were coming running in here, and there's nobody here. So, but mostly it's blowing on the back of my hand or blowing on my face.
That's far more subtle than electrifying your would you say your foot, was it?
Well, I'm not necessarily the brightest bulb in the room, but I figured out after having my toe electrocuted and then my nipple pinched that someone wanted me to get up and meditate, because this had happened before. This happened back in 1996, I think, if I've got the date right, when there was a group of what we regarded as people from between the lives, in other words, human beings meditating with me every night. And they would come in and punch me on the shoulder at 3 o'clock in the morning because they wanted that meditation very badly. I know why now. the meditation that you do you can do it during the day is the settling meditation. You usually do it at the beginning of the sleep period, when you are absorbing everything that has come to you during the day, and you do the sensing exercise, and you take your attention out of your mind, and you let all of the experience of the day come into you and fill you and flow into you. And then in the next meditation, which happens in the pre-dawn hours, and in my case usually at 3 or 4, and it's generally not exactly 3, it's the rising meditation, where you take all of that material and process it and make yourself ready for the new day. And it's a rhythm. It's a life rhythm. There's a book called The Secret of the Golden Flower. It's a little bit difficult to understand unless you have a lot of experience with meditation. Fortunately, this is actually all a lot simpler than it would sound in The Secret of the Golden Flower, but it explains briefly in a paragraph buried deep in the book the sense of the rising and setting meditations. So that's why they are at those hours.
One other person asked here about your contact process. Can you talk about that? Is that the meditation you were mentioning?
Yeah, it happened quite without my knowledge of its significance, but I did eventually figure it out. In 1970, I joined the Gurdjieff Foundation, and central to that foundation's work, to that work of G.I. Gurdjieff, is the idea that our attention normally goes out into the world around us, and we don't have anything that comes along. A plane passes over, someone shouts down the street, someone speaks to us, whatever happens, we turn on the television or the radio. Our attention goes out to all of that stuff. But there can be more done with it. You can be the master of your attention. You can take your attention and place it on your body and still go out into the world and split your attention between the inner and the outer, so that there is one arrow pointing inward and one arrow pointing outward, and it makes you a much larger person. It changes everything. And Ann and I started doing that in April of 1970, and here it is 50 years on, and I'm still doing it.
That's what I was just thinking, actually, 50 years.
Yeah, 50 years, and I do it pretty much every day. There were periods of my life where I didn't do it, and it's a long time, 50 years, but mostly it's been pretty much regular daily experience. Now, what I did not know was that this is seen by the other level of reality. You can be seen when you're in this state, because when the attention goes into the nervous system, it changes the light output of the nervous system. It literally makes you brighter. You glow on a level where they are, and they can see it. And when I say they, I mean not only the visitors, I mean the dead, and all kinds of, the whole other level of reality can see this. And here's how I figured that out. I sort of had it half-handed to me. After Annie passed away, her role in this is huge, by the way. She was the one who decided to call the book Communion. She was the one who really understood what was going on from the beginning. She orchestrated the whole thing. And after Anne died, she worked on an even higher level in the afterlife revolution and in this book as well. She is an absolutely central figure in all of this. Never forget that. In any case, after she passed away, I went to a thing in Nashville at the Scarlett Bennett Center, where we used to have the Dreamland festivals, and a friend, William Henry, and his wife Claire were having a weekend there, and I thought it would be nice to do that because they make lovely, very beautiful presentations about the spiritual and hidden meanings of Renaissance paintings and stuff like that I really enjoy. So I was there, and during one of the breaks, a lady came up to me and said, "Mr. Streiber, I would like to tell you something that's just extremely strange. I just don't know what to say." I said, "Don't worry about telling me something strange. Come on, you you know you're preaching here to the converted." And she said, "Okay, I have to tell you." Anne just said something to me. She'd known Anne from the Dreamland festivals, and I said, "Well, what did she say?" She said, "Whitley, tell Whitley I can see him when he's in the chair." I knew instantly what that meant. She could see me when I was doing the sensing exercise, because that I do it sitting in a chair, and have been doing it ever since we moved into this apartment in 2004. I've been doing it in exactly the same place every night. It's not actually a chair, but it's a couch, but I understood the meaning. So then I realized that years ago I had asked the visitors why they came here, and the answer had been, we saw a glow. One of the few times I had any kind of halfway verbal communication with them, and this was not spoken. The only spoken words I can remember were, a few, but the main ones were "have joy." But these were this was sort of a channeled thing, and I'm the world's most unsure channeler. I don't do it well at all. So this was back in probably '87 that this happened, and there was a brief period where there was an exchange between us that was real. It wasn't made up by me, and I sang out these things to Anne as they happened, and this exchange. And one of the things was, I asked, "Why did you come here?" And the answer was, "We saw a glow." And at the time, I thought they meant the glow of cities. But then I realized, the moment the woman said, "When you sit in she can see you when you sit in the chair," I realized I saw a glow, and I put two and two together over all those years, and I understood that it was the glow of the nervous system that they were talking about. That this one little guy had been sitting out there in the woods every night, and he noticed this little spark and came to see what was going on, basically. And so now that I understand this, I do it as much as I can. I do it often during the day as well, because I want this relationship. This is contact. And if you do this and you're persistent, and it's, a lot of people will come to me, they say, "Oh, I want to learn the sensing exercise. I want to meet the visitors." It's not about that, first of all. It's about you and your own spiritual development and the growth of your consciousness. The visitors are completely incidental to that. But they'll try it 3 or 4 times and nothing happens. No orbs appear, nothing dramatic happens, and so they quit. It takes a long time, and it takes dedication. This is not coming to you unless you really, really want it, and you have need for it that perhaps you yourself can't see. But the sensing exercise is so healthy and so strengthening anyway. I mean, I'm 74 years old. My blood pressure is 110/70. I'm in great physical shape, and I think a lot of it has to do with the sensing exercise. And as far as sleep deprivation is concerned, forget it. I have no problems with sleep at all. I have an excellent memory, and I'm never tired. And when I'm writing, I go from start 9 a.m. and end at 9 or 10 at night with a couple of brief meal breaks, and that's it. And then do my sensing exercises at 11 and 3 and wake up the next morning, jump out of bed ready to go for another day just the same.
I got to give you real credit. You're 74 years old with that blood pressure, no sleep deprivation, that kind of health, that kind of energy. That's great. That's beyond
Yeah,
great.
and I'm just saying it's the sensing exercise that gives you that. So even if you don't get to see the visitors, you sure as hell will get better, much healthier. Also, I think it leads to, excuse me.
Bless you.
I think it leads to deep connections between you and those on the other side who love you. And they will be aware of that, and they will start to try to help you and encourage you and give you support in all kinds of ways. And you'll learn to interact with the dead. And when people who love you die and pass on, you don't have to just let that go. You can participate in the process with them as they move to the other side. You can go deep into the other side with them. I did with my sister recently, and I did with Annie, even deeper, of course. I've done that with many, many friends and relatives and people who are on the other side who need help, because you can't, once you're there, you can't change anymore. And you might need help from this side. And we can make ourselves available if we are in this state, because we will notice those who are calling out to us for help. They may not even be people you know. I've had total strangers that I have reached out, I have found in need and have reached out to. At the Monroe Institute, founded by Robert Monroe, who wrote Journeys Out of the Body, there's a whole course in how to help needy souls. And this is very valuable stuff. So, take it all to heart. Do the exercise. Do things like get into Journeys Out of the Body and Bob Monroe's work. It's the real deal. Or if you're interested in the Gurdjieff Foundation, you can find it on the internet easily. And there's a chapter of the foundation near you. You can join it. And they have nothing to do with the close encounter experience. As far as I know, they know nothing about it. But they do know a lot about Gurdjieff's work, and it's valuable work at every level.
It sounds like being a guide. When you said helping a soul, even strangers, is that what you mean too?
Yeah. Being a what?
A guide, spiritual guide.
Oh, I don't think of myself as a guide. I'm the worst guide in the world. I can't even find the other side of the street half the time. I don't really think of it that way. When somebody comes to me, like people often who are trapped on this level will come to us, who are living on this level, because they have no idea. To them, they died and they were still in the world. Only nobody, like Anne said at first, she said, it's like you're all intentionally ignoring us. That's what she said, one of the first things she said when she was still on this level. And what happened in Anne's case is she found her own way, because she was, let's face it, I mean, she was a pretty advanced soul. But people are trapped on this level. And there's a movement you learn. You learn to turn them, because they can't turn. To them, it looks just like it, there's absolutely no exit from this level of reality at all. They can't see it in any way. I worked with one woman for 9 years trying to get her to finally realize that she really was dead. Finally, she did. She turned away from her imaginary vision of the world and toward me. In other words, she turned away from herself and toward another person. And I saw an intense look of surprise come into her face, and her eyes turned to gold, and she disappeared. She shot off. She had finally found a way out. And that's how you help souls.
That's like crossing over. I've heard other people talk about that, finding lost souls, people who don't even know they're dead too, and help them
Yeah,
get to the other side.
yeah. Help them get to the other side when they don't know they're dead. And we can do that. And so, you know, you're, if you start doing this work, like, doing the sensing exercise and getting involved in the soul level, then, you're going to turn out to be very needed, because there'll be plenty of people who need your help, and they'll come to you. That you'll find them.
Now, I've been wanting to ask you this for a long time. Can we talk about the USS Nimitz incident?
Yeah,
What's your take on it? Because to me, that was as if the government was saying, okay, they are real. We can't explain it, but here they go.
the visitors are orchestrating their own emergence, and the release of those videos, which was a very strange process and not at all involved in the normal declassification process, is part of that. They are coming out. My book is part of it, because it shows what communication with them involves. And my book's going to be, a few people read it. People in our world will read it and be interested in it, I hope. But most people could not care less about something like that until they show up. Now that the book is there, it provides a foundation for useful interaction with them, and therefore there is something for them to turn to when they show up, and that was not present before. It's all part of this process. Now there will be more things coming out, more overt things occurring, and there will be, as two things are going to intersect. The planet's environment is going to continue to deteriorate, and at a certain juncture where we can no longer deny that we're in trouble, they're going to show up and offer help. There will be a
Rescue.
price to pay, and a lot of people are not going to want to pay that price. I paid it a long time ago, and I love living the way I live. And you can read all about that also in the book. It's not the end of the world by any means. It is a great trade. We talk about trade all the time in our world. This is the greatest trade ever offered to mankind.
When do you foresee this?
Well, they say to me, it will come upon them unaware. And the result of this is, I'm not sure. I don't know. I mean, when they say, their attitude is, there's going to be an extraordinary environmental crisis or some kind of crisis here of some sort. They may not know what it is. In fact, I'm fairly sure they can't foretell the future beyond a certain point. They have more knowledge, and therefore they have more of an ability to foresee the future. But there's still an element of chance in there somewhere, either that or they hold it back from me. I don't know which. But in any case, they say it will come upon us unaware. And when some huge crisis envelops the world, that's when you can expect them to show up, in my opinion.
A rescue. It sounds like a rescue, but at the same time, you also said the great exchange, the great trade. Very
It's a great
interesting.
trade. Yeah, it is a trade. And I'm not going to go into it here because we've only got a couple of minutes and people aren't going to understand it. Half the people reading the book won't understand it. But a lot of people will. And the people listening to a show like this, especially Close Encounter Witnesses, are going to understand immediately what I'm talking about and are going to realize that, hey, I can actually do that. And I can take it from me, once you get into it and once you really let them into your life, it's extraordinary. It is. It's not unpleasant at all.
One last couple things real quick. Let me ask you this. You mentioned earlier a price to pay, and you've paid that price. Can you talk about that real quick?
Yeah. The price to pay is that you have to give up, basically you have to give up what we think of as ego. In other words, you cannot you have to learn to live by compassion, humility, and love. And that's, you can't live by greed, and you can't live by, whatever I want is what is important. You can't live from self. You have to live from the needs of others. And that's part of the price. But there's another price in my life, and I may have been talking about this other price, which is that when you come out with something like this, you're going to be completely discredited and laughed at. And I've endured that all my life, all my adult life. Or not all of it. I had enough of an adult life before this happened to me to remember how nice it was before I had to go out and talk about this stuff and be sneered at and so forth, which is I get an awful lot of.
Well, fortunately now we have a lot of support, and that's what I find very interesting, and I find you very brave, Whitley. Honestly, you were the first to me. You were definitely the first. I didn't hear about Travis till mid '90s, but you
Well,
were.
Travis was out there hanging on the end of his own string before I was. Don't forget that.
The message you mentioned about compassion, humility, and love, honestly, is the best message, and I can't think of anywhere else to stop. I'm going to keep you for a second afterwards, but I'm also going to give you a moment to talk about your book, where people can find it and where people can find you.
Okay, well, you can find me on unknowncountry.com. It's my website. It's a big website, very active. It's got a lot of areas that are free. It's also got a subscription area, and I urge you to subscribe because it can't live without subscribers. And the book is available right now just on Amazon. It'll be available elsewhere shortly. It is available as a Kindle, as a paperback, and will be available as an audiobook, I think, in a few days.
And that right there, I'm going to call it a wrap. Everyone, you know where to find me, which is Dr. J Radio Live. And of course, that's the same name for the show: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Flickr, Tumblr. Whatever you want, it's under the same name. Now, me and Whitley are officially going to sign off.